The ward was bathed in the pale glow of fluorescent lights, their hum almost hypnotic. Night had settled over the hospital, but it was far from silent. Monitors beeped in irregular rhythms. 4 drips clicked steadily. Patients shifted beneath thin sheets, some murmuring in their sleep, others awake and restless. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, mingling with faint traces of food from the nurse's station. She moved among them with deliberate care, each step soft, measured, almost invisible. A fresh bandage here, a quiet adjustment there, her hands steady and precise. No one noticed how she paused to read a subtle shift in a patient's breathing, or how she adjusted a monitor before it even alarmed. To the staff, she was simply another nurse on the night shift, quiet, efficient, unassuming. A nurse aide rushed past, nearly colliding with her cart. "Sorry," the aide muttered, flustered, and she gave a small nod, offering no judgment, only a brief, controlled glance that reassured the aide to keep moving. She didn't speak more than necessary. She didn't need to. Actions carried weight on this floor, even if no one realized it. The phone rang softly at the station. She glanced at the clock. 2:13 a.m. A patient groaned in bed 4, she was already halfway there, adjusting an oxygen mask before the monitors tripped. Quiet competence, she thought. It went unnoticed because nobody looked for it. In the corner, the janitor hummed a tune while pushing a cart of supplies. He didn't see her observe him with a calm, precise awareness, his movements, his timing, the way he paused at intersections of the hall. To anyone else, she blended into the background, but every motion, every glance, was calculated. Nothing was wasted. A sudden cough echoed from the isolation room at the end of the hall. She approached slowly, assessing before acting. The patient inside was short of breath, panicked, but her calm presence was like a steady anchor. She adjusted the oxygen, reassured the patient in a low, firm tone. The tremor in the patient's chest slowed. Relief passed over their face, unspoken gratitude that would never reach the ears of the ward. She returned to her rounds. The quiet persistence of her footsteps was rhythmic, almost meditative. She checked charts, straightened blankets, administered medication. The night was ordinary. Yet, every movement hinted at control, at discipline, at experience far beyond the badge of a simple ward nurse. Down the hall, voices rose suddenly, a nurse arguing with a resident over dosage, a monitor blaring an alert in the background. She approached neither too quickly nor too slowly. She assessed, corrected, and adjusted, her hands moving decisively. Within seconds, the immediate problem was neutralized. The resident thanked her with a distracted nod, unaware of the precision behind her calm. Her eyes flicked toward the entrance to the ward. Outside, the shadows of the night shift lingered in the corridor. Footsteps echoed faintly, slow and deliberate. A faint tension threaded through the air. She felt it, a shift, subtle, almost imperceptible. Nothing yet, but the calm before a storm was always deceptive. She paused, placing a hand lightly on a patient's shoulder, feeling the shallow rise and fall of their chest. Her jaw tightened minutely. The night was quiet. Too quiet. Her senses extended beyond the immediate ward, the hum of the ventilation system, the distant clatter from the ER, the faint metallic scent carried from the surgical wing. All of it fed into a mental map she was forming, preparing herself, even as everyone else remained oblivious to the tension simmering just beyond the walls. The clock ticked to 2:27 a.m. A distant commotion rippled through the hospital, a sound she recognized before anyone else could. Instinct, experience, training, skills hidden behind the calm facade. She straightened her uniform, adjusted the supplies on her cart, and continued her rounds, utterly composed. But her mind was already calculating, anticipating. In the ward, she remained just another quiet nurse. Unseen. Underestimated. But the night would not remain quiet for long. The ward had settled into a rhythm, or at least the illusion of one. Machines hummed steadily, nurses moved between beds, and the distant sounds of the hospital, trolleys rolling, muffled conversations, the occasional alarm, blended into a monotonous backdrop. To most, it was a typical night. To her, it was a prelude. A patient in bed 6 coughed violently, clutching at the sides of his chest. The resident on duty approached, hesitated, glanced at her, and said, "I think he's just panicking." She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she observed, breathing patterns, skin tone, the way the oxygen tubing had slipped slightly. Within seconds, she adjusted the equipment, applied gentle pressure, and whispered calm instructions. The patient's panic subsided. The resident looked surprised but said nothing. In the supply closet, a monitor began to beep erratically. The aide fumbled, unsure what to do. She appeared beside him in a quiet, fluid motion, taking over with minimal disturbance. A simple recalibration, a nod to the aide to resume his task, and the potential escalation was neutralized. No one noticed the speed, precision, or quiet authority behind her actions. Even the smallest disturbances hinted at the coming storm. Down the hall, a delivery cart collided with the wall, sending a metal tray clattering to the floor. Staff rushed to clean up, voices raised in minor frustration. She walked past without a word, mentally noting the route, the position of people, and potential blind spots. Every movement in the ward, every minor error or panic, was a variable she catalogued silently. A call came from the ER, a patient was arriving in critical condition. The nurse glanced at the clock, 2:49 a.m., and calculated response times, available staff, and necessary interventions. She made subtle adjustments to the ward layout, carts shifted, supplies aligned, stretchers prepared. Her colleagues went about their routines, unaware that a small, methodical orchestration was unfolding around them. Moments later, the patient in bed 2 began showing irregular vitals. The resident hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. She moved decisively, adjusting 4 rates, stabilizing the monitors, and calmly instructing the resident on what to do. Her voice was firm but measured, carrying authority without demanding it. The ward felt safer, even though no one understood why. Even the night staff, usually oblivious to such precision, began to take note, subtle glances, silent acknowledgement, unspoken trust. Yet they could not place the depth of her competence. Her calm presence had created a buffer against the small disturbances of the night, a buffer that would soon be tested far beyond its current limits. Then, a subtle disturbance in the hallway caught her attention. Footsteps, deliberate but cautious, moving faster than a casual walk. She paused, listening. Nothing overt, yet a tension threaded through the air. Her gaze swept the ward, noting potential vulnerabilities, the location of the nurse's station, blind corners, the positions of patients. Small details, insignificant to most, were pieces of a larger map she was constructing, preparing for the chaos she could sense approaching. The night's rhythm, delicate and controlled, was beginning to fracture. Staff were unaware, but she could feel it, the early warnings, the signs of escalating danger. The calm would not last. And when the storm arrived, she would be ready. The distant wail of sirens punctuated the night, slicing through the soft hum of the ward. She was in the middle of checking vitals when the first subtle tremor of alarm reached her, a radio crackle from security, hurried footsteps echoing down the corridor, a voice clipped with tension. Something had arrived, and it was not ordinary. A patient in bed 5 began thrashing suddenly, disoriented and frightened. The aide attempted to calm him but froze, overwhelmed. She stepped forward without hesitation, guiding the patient with firm but gentle hands, restraining the panic without harshness. Her calm efficiency contrasted sharply with the rising tension in the room. Colleagues glanced at her, startled by her composure, but said nothing. The hospital doors rattled as a group of people arrived, their movement coordinated, deliberate. From the hall, muffled shouts reached the ward, security was struggling to maintain control. Panic began to seep into the rooms, and the patient sensed it, their fear contagious. She scanned the environment, noting exits, possible threats, and the positions of both staff and patients. Every detail mattered, every misstep could escalate the chaos. An orderly burst in, shouting, "Code Red." Armed intruder reported near the ER. The words hung in the air like smoke. Nurses and residents froze, some unsure of protocol, others instinctively moving into positions they hoped would help. She did not panic. Instead, she assessed, calculating the best immediate actions. Her first move was subtle yet precise. She repositioned a stretcher, ensuring it could serve as a barricade if needed. She quietly guided a patient away from the hall without alarming anyone else. A monitor beeped in urgent rhythm, but she did not flinch. The threat was coming, and preparation, not panic, was the shield. Down the hall, she glimpsed the first signs of the intruder, shadowed figures moving in controlled steps, weapons glinting faintly under the corridor lights. The ward staff noticed too late, scattering instinctively, creating vulnerable gaps. She moved between them seamlessly, a silent presence of order, redirecting them without a word, positioning them safely, and securing critical pathways. The intruder's approach intensified. The distant sounds of struggle echoed from the ER. Someone tried to barricade a door, but it wasn't enough. Fear rippled through the ward like a contagion, but her calm held steady, a quiet axis around which chaos spun. Even the residents began unconsciously deferring to her gestures and subtle commands, unaware of why they followed. A patient screamed from bed 8, disoriented and panicked. Without hesitation, she moved, kneeling beside the bed, speaking in measured tones, stabilizing vitals, and calming the patient. Her hands worked quickly, precise, never wasted. Every action, though simple, revealed competence, though no one yet understood its depth. Her internal map of the ward shifted as she accounted for every variable, where the intruder might enter next, which doors could be secured, which staff members were panicking, and which patients were at risk. She calculated escape routes, fallback positions, and potential points of engagement. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, tactical. Then came the unmistakable sound of the intruder breaching a secondary door. Security yelled orders, but coordination faltered. She moved closer to the corridor, eyes sharp, every muscle ready, yet still composed. Her presence alone began to anchor the staff. They followed her silently, instinctively trusting her direction. The chaos reached a fever pitch. Patients screamed, machines blared, and the ward's usual rhythm was fractured completely. Yet she remained calm, the eye of the storm, assessing, directing, preparing for the confrontation she knew was inevitable. Even as adrenaline surged through the room, she felt no fear, only awareness. Every threat had a solution. Every movement had a purpose. And when the intruder finally reached the ward, she would be ready, not as a nurse, not as a caregiver, but as someone far beyond what anyone here could imagine. The sirens outside grew louder, and the first glimpses of tactical uniforms appeared at the far end of the corridor, alert but delayed. Her eyes flicked to them, backup was coming, but not yet. For now, the ward depended entirely on her, though no one truly knew the extent of the force that controlled it. The intruder reached the ward with a measured stride, weapon raised, eyes scanning the rooms for targets. Staff froze in place, paralyzed by fear. Patients cried out, some shielding themselves with trembling hands, others gripping the bedsheets. Every second stretched unbearably, the beeps of monitors marking time with relentless precision. She stepped forward. Not quickly, not with drama, simply forward. Her movements were controlled, deliberate, yet every action radiated authority. She positioned herself between the intruder and the nearest patient, subtly using the bed and surrounding equipment as barriers. Her voice, calm and firm, cut through the panic. Step back. No one moves. No one questioned her. Staff instinctively followed, creating a protective perimeter around the patients. The intruder hesitated, surprised by her composure. He made a move, testing her boundaries, and she shifted with minimal effort, her stance precise and unyielding. It wasn't violence, it was strategy. Her eyes never left his, reading micro-movements, assessing risk, calculating next actions. A resident tried to intervene, trembling, and she gently but firmly redirected him, focus on the patients. Leave it to me. Her tone carried a weight that left no room for argument. He nodded, stunned, and returned to tending to the frightened patients. She never raised her voice. She never yelled. Yet control was absolute. The intruder lunged toward a bed, aiming for a patient who had begun to panic. In one fluid motion, she intercepted, guiding his weapon hand aside with calculated leverage, redirecting his momentum without striking him. He stumbled, frustrated, and she maintained a calm stance, her focus unwavering. It was a dance of restraint and authority, every move measured, precise, efficient. Staff watched, silently astonished. The nurse, this quiet, unassuming figure, was orchestrating the situation. Her eyes scanned the room continuously, noting vulnerabilities, anticipating the intruder's next move. She repositioned chairs and carts subtly, creating barriers without making it obvious, her hands steady even as adrenaline surged through the air. The intruder tried a second tactic, shouting, attempting to intimidate. She responded with silence, her presence alone projecting a containment force stronger than any words. She moved between him and the nearest patient again, recalibrating angles, ensuring every path was controlled. He hesitated. He was skilled, armed, but she had already neutralized the simplest methods of his assault through positioning and control. A sudden alarm from the ER rang, signaling the arrival of additional threats or backup. It was unclear. The intruder flinched at the sound. She used the moment to reposition a stretcher, blocking a direct route to the other beds. Patients were now shielded, staff protected, and the intruder contained within her line of sight. Then she knelt by a patient whose monitor was beeping frantically, adjusting settings quickly, calming the patient with a few low, precise words. In less than a minute, the immediate risk to the patient was gone, yet she never looked at the act as heroic. It was necessary. She repeated her scan of the ward, identifying remaining risks, adjusting positions, and ensuring every patient had a protective buffer. The intruder's confidence wavered. He tested her again, moving closer with calculated intent. She didn't flinch. Instead, she assessed the options, choosing restraint over confrontation. She manipulated the environment, using barriers and positioning rather than force, guiding him toward an area where he could do the least harm. Every step was methodical, grounded, precise. Some staff were now following her almost instinctively, moving patients, holding doors, redirecting minor hazards, all without direction, yet in perfect alignment with her subtle guidance. Her authority was indirect but absolute. She did not raise her voice. She did not strike. She did not perform feats of brute force. She controlled the situation through observation, anticipation, and quiet decisiveness. Minutes passed like hours. The ward remained tense, but the immediate threat was managed. No one had been seriously harmed, yet the intruder was contained, disoriented, and frustrated. Staff glanced at her with wide eyes, beginning to understand that the quiet nurse was operating far beyond any expectations. She remained in place, scanning every corner, adjusting, moving, protecting. Her calm was not theatrical, it was earned through experience, skill, and a deep understanding of risk. She had turned what could have been chaos into order without shouting, without force, and without spectacle. The first confrontation ended not with violence, but with control. The intruder retreated slightly, confused and off balance. The ward exhaled collectively, yet the tension lingered. No one applauded. No one recognized the full measure of what had just occurred. Only she understood the calculations behind every move, the decisions that had kept everyone alive. As the intruder fell back into the hallway, distant shouts signaled the arrival of backup, or perhaps reinforcements for him. She didn't wait. She continued scanning, moving, calculating. The night was far from over, and she was already anticipating the next wave of danger. Every action spoke of competence beyond the visible, every decision reflected a mind trained for threats far beyond this ward. The staff remained unaware of her true capacity. The patient sensed calm and safety, even as the undercurrent of tension persisted. And in that quiet, controlled authority, the ward had found its pivot. A quiet nurse, underestimated by all, had turned the tide of the first confrontation without ever revealing the depth of her skill. The ward was tense but functional. Patients were stable, though shaken. Staff moved cautiously, glancing toward her for direction without realizing why. The intruder had retreated, but the threat remained. She knew this was only the beginning. She began subtle adjustments, shifting the flow of the ward. Stretchers and chairs were repositioned to create natural barriers, a quiet containment strategy. She directed one nurse to monitor vitals in a specific pattern, another to keep emergency equipment within easy reach, all without issuing explicit commands. Her authority was implicit, earned through competence rather than title. Down the hall, distant shouting indicated the intruder's allies might arrive. She paused at a patient's bedside, checking the monitor, the patient's breathing. Each action was deliberate, calm, almost ritualistic. But beneath it was calculation, every step of her routine accounted for potential escalation. The aide who had earlier panicked now moved with a tentative confidence, shadowing her motions. She noticed and subtly guided him, a nod, a gesture, a slight redirection of his movements. He did not need to understand why he followed, he simply did. Her eyes swept the ward continuously. Every corridor junction, every door, every possible entry point was catalogued. She visualized angles, cover, potential obstacles. She anticipated where the intruder could strike next, where chaos could erupt. And she prepared silently, without disrupting the ward's fragile calm. A call came from the ER, another patient, critical, arriving soon. She adjusted her plan instantly, reallocating staff, ensuring resources were pre-positioned. She moved a cart quietly to block one corridor, keeping the path clear for evacuation if necessary. Each action was invisible to most, yet every movement increased the ward's safety. The intruder, or intruders, remained outside, their intentions unknown. She did not attempt to confront them directly, instead, she focused on preparation and containment. Staff began unconsciously following her guidance, moving patients and adjusting positions in sync with her subtle cues. The ward was beginning to operate as a single organism, anchored by her quiet command. She approached a monitor beeping faintly, noting irregularities. While attending to it, she scanned the doors again. Every reflection, every shadow, every flicker of movement registered. She could anticipate threats before they manifested, a skill honed in prior life but hidden behind her calm demeanor. Then came the first real complication. A patient began seizing, unrelated to the external threat. The resident panicked, fumbling for medication. She moved swiftly, taking control without fanfare. One hand stabilized the patient, another adjusted the monitor, her voice firm and low, "Keep the airway clear. I've got this." Within moments, the seizure subsided. Staff looked on, stunned but grateful. Her ability to manage multiple crises simultaneously became evident. She returned to surveying the ward. The intruder had not yet returned, but the signs of potential escalation were unmistakable. She noticed a loose door latch, a blocked hallway, a stretcher not properly positioned. Each minor hazard was corrected with minimal disruption, the ward's functionality maintained under growing pressure. Subtle signals began arriving from the hall, footsteps, muffled commands, distant radio chatter. She interpreted them instantly, predicting likely points of entry, possible tactics. The ward was quiet, but tension radiated just beneath the surface. She was ready. Her tactical shift was complete. The ward, previously chaotic and vulnerable, now operated efficiently, almost preemptively. Patients were shielded, staff were guided, and every potential point of threat had been accounted for. Yet, no one outside her mind understood the orchestration behind it. They saw only a calm nurse doing her rounds. She paused at a corner, glancing at a cluster of staff. Their unease was evident, but their reliance on her was undeniable. Without a word, without any display of force, she had transformed a frightened, scattered group into a coordinated unit. The first wave had been contained. The second would not be as predictable. She knew the intruder would test her limits again. And she would be ready, quiet, methodical, restrained, and absolutely in control. The night storm had not yet arrived, but the foundation had been laid. Every decision, every adjustment, every subtle gesture was part of a larger strategy. The ward was no longer simply a place of care, it had become a zone of calculated defense, anchored by the nurse no one realized was far more than she seemed. The ward's fragile calm shattered in a heartbeat. A sudden alarm from the ER blared, followed by a chaotic flurry of footsteps and raised voices. The intruder, or perhaps a new threat, had returned, moving faster this time, more unpredictable. Panic rippled instantly through the staff. Patients shrieked, some banging against rails, others crying out for help. She reacted without hesitation. Her mind catalogued everything, the location of each patient, each staff member, every doorway and hallway junction. She moved fluidly between beds, guiding terrified patients to safer positions, adjusting IVs, stabilizing monitors. Her voice, calm and precise, cut through the rising panic. Stay low. Keep calm. Move with me. No one questioned her, instinctively, they obeyed. The new threat was chaotic. Unlike the first intruder, this one moved erratically, breaking standard patterns, testing limits. Staff tried to block hallways, but panic made them slow, uncoordinated. She intervened silently, repositioning equipment to create barriers, using the ward's layout to channel movement without anyone noticing the strategy forming around them. A sudden incident near bed 4 escalated further, a patient with a sudden cardiac complication collapsed mid-movement. The resident froze, unsure whether to prioritize the patient or the threat. She knelt instantly, stabilizing the patient, adjusting the oxygen, and securing the airway. Every action was precise, calm, controlled, yet executed under extreme pressure. Staff glanced at her in awe, beginning to comprehend, without fully understanding, the depth of her capability. The intruder, or intruders, were testing her, forcing decisions that required calculation and restraint. She could have used force to push them back, but she chose containment, positioning, and anticipation instead. Every maneuver was tactical, subtle, deliberate, and measured to minimize harm to patients and staff alike. In the hall, muffled shouts indicated approaching backup, or additional threats. She adjusted her plan immediately. A stretcher was shifted to block one corridor, a chair was tipped slightly to prevent direct access to another. Every adjustment was invisible to most, yet each step protected lives. She anticipated the intruder's movements before they even attempted them, creating a defensive choreography that seemed effortless. Then came the moral complication. One of the patients, alone in a corner, was clearly in danger if she continued prioritizing the ward over immediate care. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, calculation, weighing risk versus immediate need. Finally, she made the choice. She would leave herself exposed to redirect the intruder while securing the patient. It was a quiet sacrifice, unremarkable in appearance, but it bore the weight of responsibility and risk. Her hands moved deftly, adjusting equipment, stabilizing the patient while simultaneously monitoring the threat. The intruder moved closer, testing her calm, testing her resolve. She didn't panic, she anticipated, she positioned, she restrained. The room was controlled chaos, but she was the anchor. A nurse tried to intervene in fear, moving toward the threat. She guided the nurse gently, firmly, repositioning her to maintain safety. Her authority remained indirect yet absolute. No one had to question her judgment. It was evident in the precision of her actions, in the way the ward functioned around her. The intruder hesitated, frustrated by the lack of compliance from the ward and the invisible boundaries she had established. They tried to push through, but her presence, calculated positioning, and subtle use of the ward structure impeded them without confrontation. She did not strike, she did not shout. Control was achieved through anticipation and measured action, not force. For a brief moment, she paused, taking a mental stock of the situation. Every patient accounted for. Every staff member positioned. Every entry and exit monitored. She could feel exhaustion creeping in, but the stakes allowed no lapse. The moral weight of every choice, who was safe, who might be harmed, who she could protect, pressed down silently. Then a new complication arose. A secondary alarm indicated another patient critical in the adjoining room. Without hesitation, she moved to stabilize that patient while maintaining vigilance over the intruder. Her hands were steady, her mind precise, every action balancing risk with restraint. The staff followed instinctively, understanding that the quiet nurse was the pivot holding the ward together. Minutes stretched. Every second demanded attention, calculation, and calm under pressure. She managed simultaneous crises, constrained by the moral responsibility of her role, guided not by heroics but by disciplined competence. Every patient she touched, every path she blocked, every subtle command she issued carried unseen authority. The intruder's agitation grew. They attempted a breach from an unexpected direction. She anticipated it, redirecting their path with a slight movement of a stretcher, a shift of body position, a quiet verbal cue. Chaos was tempered. Lives were protected. The ward remained functional, though every person in it felt the rising tension. She took a brief moment to adjust her stance, surveying the room. The subtle sacrifices she had made, leaving herself exposed, guiding staff without explanation, had maintained safety so far. The storm was not yet over, but she had proven that calm, precise action under pressure could contain even unpredictable threats. The escalation had tested her limits, forced moral choices, and revealed her discipline. The staff began to recognize, without understanding fully, that this quiet nurse was extraordinary. Yet the full truth remained hidden, waiting for the moment when authority would be externally validated. The ward was tense, the air thick with the weight of decisions no one else understood. Patients were stabilized but frightened, staff were on edge, and the intruder remained a looming threat just beyond the hall. She paused for a moment, scanning the room, taking stock, not just of the physical danger, but of the ethical stakes she bore alone. A patient in bed 7 began to deteriorate rapidly, a cardiac irregularity, subtle but dangerous. The resident moved hesitantly, unsure of the treatment, caught between attending to the patient and the wider threat. She acted immediately, kneeling beside the patient, administering the correct interventions with steady hands. Yet the intruder's movements drew her attention, and she knew focusing here could leave the ward exposed. The choice was clear: save the patient now, or risk the ward's overall safety. Her hand rested briefly on the patient's chest as she monitored vitals, making calculations at a speed no one could comprehend. Time stretched, the seconds heavy with consequence. She chose both, accepting personal risk. She repositioned a nearby cart, creating a temporary barrier while continuing the treatment. Her body moved as if choreographed, protecting the patient, maintaining the ward's defensive structure, and holding the intruder's threat at bay without drawing attention. A nurse attempted to assist but hesitated, fear rooting her in place. The quiet nurse guided her with a gentle touch, positioning her where she could help safely, but without explicit direction. Authority was exercised without words. The staff began following instinctively, a network of controlled action forming around her unseen. Another complication arose: a secondary patient began bleeding internally, unnoticed until a monitor alarmed faintly. She acted instantly, prioritizing intervention while maintaining situational awareness. Every movement was precise, controlled, disciplined. She did not shout. She did not panic. She performed what was necessary, the moral weight of each decision pressing silently. The intruder moved again, testing boundaries, but she had anticipated his path. Using a subtle shift of equipment and body positioning, she redirected him without force. No one noticed, yet the room's safety depended entirely on her anticipation and restraint. Exhaustion crept in, her muscles ached, her mind ran constantly through risk calculations. Each action she took required energy, but the stakes demanded it. She could not afford hesitation, and there was no room for error. Every patient, every staff member, every potential point of failure demanded her attention simultaneously. A young patient began crying out for their parent, escalating panic in the room. She paused for a fraction of a second, acknowledging the child with calm presence, then guided them gently to the corner, shielding them without disrupting the ward's defensive structure. Her quiet authority reassured even in the absence of words. The intruder tested her again, moving unpredictably. She chose restraint over aggression, holding her position while subtly channeling him away from the most vulnerable patients. Every decision was a balance between immediate action and long-term consequence, between protection and moral responsibility. In the corner, a nurse whispered, How are you so calm?" She offered no answer, only a glance that conveyed control, knowledge, and responsibility beyond what could be explained. Her sacrifice was quiet. She bore risk without acknowledgement, moral weight without discussion, authority without fanfare. By the time the threat paused, the ward had been stabilized through discipline and quiet sacrifice. No one fully realized the calculations behind each action, the personal risk taken, or the decisions made that weighed on her silently. Staff and patients were safe. Equipment was intact. The intruder was contained, frustrated but held in check by anticipation and subtle tactical choices rather than brute force. She straightened her uniform, adjusted a patient's blanket, and returned to scanning the ward. The moral cost lingered, her body ached, her mind was tense, but no one knew. There was no applause, no recognition. The sacrifice was invisible, yet essential. Every choice she had made balanced life, safety, and moral responsibility. The night was far from over, but she had demonstrated control under pressure, the weight of authority exercised with restraint, and the willingness to risk personal safety for the lives of others. Her competence was undeniable, even if it remained unrecognized. In the shadows of the ward, she remained quiet, understated, unassuming, the nurse everyone thought they knew. But the truth of her skill, her discipline, and her moral courage had already begun to shape the course of the night. The ward held its breath. Every patient was as safe as possible, every staff member positioned by subtle cues, every doorway and corridor accounted for. Yet tension remained taut, a wire stretched to its limit. Outside, muffled voices echoed, heavy boots approached, and the first signs of the FBI tactical team became audible through the distant commotion. She remained calm, scanning the hall continuously. Her eyes registered everything, the flick of a shadow in the doorway, the echo of footsteps on linoleum, the faint vibration of doors rattled by movement elsewhere. Her mind worked ahead of the threat, anticipating the intruder's next actions, calculating angles, positions, and timing. Every variable was accounted for. The intruder attempted one final push, moving toward the patient nearest the hall. She shifted instantly, guiding him with subtle body placement and environmental barriers. Her presence, calm and authoritative, froze him in place. There was no aggression, no shouting, just quiet, measured control. He hesitated, unsure, caught between compliance and frustration. Then the sounds came, heavy boots, the unmistakable rhythm of tactical gear, voices crisp and authoritative. "Ward nurse, identify yourself," one voice called over the radio. Heads turned instinctively toward the sound, but only she recognized the name. A calm authority radiated from the corridor as the team's presence made the intruder falter. From the far hall, the FBI tactical team entered with precise movements, weapons low but ready. Their leader scanned the ward, eyes locking on her. "Ma'am," he said with a clipped, professional tone. "We need you at the front." The room shifted, staff glanced nervously, patients sensed the change. She stepped forward, acknowledging the request, her calm unbroken, her authority finally validated externally. The intruder froze entirely, trapped between the operational coordination she had already established and the new, armed presence now asserting authority. The ward staff watched, unsure of what they were witnessing, but trusting instinctively the woman who had guided them through chaos. She moved to the corridor entrance, positioning herself between the intruder and the tactical team. Every motion remained deliberate, controlled, and restrained. She guided the team with quiet signals, adjusting angles, redirecting patient movement, ensuring everyone was protected. No words were wasted, no dramatics were needed. Every instruction was a gesture, every glance an order. The intruder, now fully contained, attempted one last erratic movement. She anticipated it instantly, redirecting him toward the center of the ward, away from patients and staff. The team moved in synchronization, guided subtly by her prepositioning, and secured him without incident. The threat neutralized, the ward finally exhaled collectively. She remained in the center of the room, surveying every patient, every staff member. Equipment was in order, pathways were clear, and everyone had survived without significant injury. Her competence had guided the ward through every escalation, every moral choice, every potential disaster. Yet recognition remained understated. The tactical team nodded to her, professional acknowledgement without fanfare. One of the officers approached. "Your assessment was precise. You held the ward together." She nodded briefly, acknowledging the praise without comment, her focus returning to the patients. There was no need for validation, no desire for recognition. The work was never about applause, it was about keeping people alive, intact, and safe. She walked slowly between the beds, checking monitors and equipment. Patients stirred, some tearful, some wide-eyed, sensing the calm she radiated. Staff looked on, admiration and confusion mingling, unsure of how one quiet nurse had achieved what they could barely comprehend. The intruder was secured, waiting for removal. The tactical team moved to extract him efficiently, their precision a mirror of her own quiet control. She watched, calculating the risk until the last person was accounted for, the last patient stabilized. Then, as the team prepared to leave the ward, she returned to routine. She straightened blankets, adjusted 4 lines, and checked monitors with the same quiet diligence as she had before the crisis. The officers acknowledged her silently and moved on. No media, no applause, no hero spotlight, just work, just responsibility, just the quiet authority that had always been her way. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were steady, her mind still calculating, but the moral weight of the night had shifted. The intruder contained, the ward intact, the patient safe. Every decision she had made, every sacrifice she had silently borne, had achieved its purpose. Staff began tidying up, still dazed but compliant with her subtle guidance. The aide who had earlier panicked moved confidently now, following her lead instinctively. The resident glanced at her with wide eyes, a mixture of awe and respect, though he could not articulate it. Outside the ward, the hum of the hospital returned, faint but persistent. Footsteps echoed down distant corridors, patients settled, and monitors resumed their steady rhythm. The crisis had passed, yet the calm she projected anchored the ward. There was no ceremony, no accolades. Only the quiet, heavy weight of responsibility fulfilled. She paused at the nurse's station, reviewing charts and equipment. Her uniform was unchanged, her expression calm, her hands steady. The FBI tactical team had left, the intruder removed, the ward safe. Her authority had been acknowledged externally, validated in the only way that mattered, but the world would not know her story. And that was exactly as it should be. She resumed her rounds. Each patient checked, each monitor monitored, every risk accounted for. The quiet ward nurse, underestimated by all, had been the pivot of survival. The night was calm again, but the truth lingered in subtle glances and unconscious trust. She had saved the ward without spectacle, without acknowledgement, without demand. The storm had passed, but its imprint remained, in her measured steps, in the staff's silent recognition, and in the knowledge that authority does not need announcement. It exists quietly, inevitably, in those who are prepared, disciplined, and resolute. The ward was safe. The patients were alive. The staff was guided. And she continued her work, unseen in her true depth, uncelebrated, unspoken, but absolutely in control. The ward settled into a fragile calm. The monitors beeped at their usual rhythm, the distant hum of the ventilation system filling the spaces between the occasional cough or shift of a patient. Staff moved slowly, carefully, still processing the chaos that had passed. The intruder was gone. The tactical team had left. The ward was intact. She walked the familiar path between beds, checking each patient as she always did. A child stirred, reaching out for the blanket she had adjusted earlier. She straightened it, offering a gentle nod, then moved on. The residents glanced at her occasionally, their respect unspoken but unmistakable. No one asked for her story. No one needed to. Her hands adjusted 4 lines, checked monitors, and straightened charts. Every movement was precise, economical, necessary. The ward had survived because of her, but recognition was irrelevant. She did not seek it. Her reward was quiet, the steady breathing of patients, the measured footsteps of staff now moving with tentative confidence, the restored rhythm of the hospital itself. A nurse aide approached hesitantly, glancing toward her. I don't know how you stayed so calm," he whispered. She offered a small, unreadable smile, saying nothing. Words were unnecessary, her presence alone had taught what could not be explained. The resident looked toward the nurse's station, eyes wide, still shaken. That was incredible," he muttered. She nodded briefly, returning her focus to her duties. The ward had recovered, and the life of each patient had been preserved. That was enough. Outside, the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, softening the harsh fluorescent glow. The ward, once a place of chaos, now seemed ordinary again. Machines hummed, the smells of antiseptic and clean surfaces filled the air, and the night's tension began to fade into memory. She moved to the supply closet, replacing items that had been shifted or used, maintaining order without comment. The staff followed her lead unconsciously, their actions smoother, more coordinated, yet unaware of why. She had left her mark quietly, subtly, with no need for acknowledgement. A visitor arrived for one of the patients, smiling through concern, noticing only the calm efficiency of the night staff. No one knew of the intruder, the crisis, or the nurse who had held it all together. She gave the visitor a soft nod, then continued her rounds, eyes scanning the ward with the same disciplined attention as before the night began. Her shift was not yet over. She would continue, patient by patient, task by task, maintaining vigilance. No heroics. No applause. Just quiet, relentless care and authority exercised without fanfare. The ward's survival was hers alone, acknowledged only in the subtle trust and obedience of those who had witnessed her calm competence. As the morning light grew, the hospital began to stir with routine. Doctors, nurses, and staff moved through their duties, unaware of the extraordinary control exercised quietly through the night. She returned to her station, reviewing charts, straightening blankets, adjusting monitors, invisible but essential. The storm had passed. The threat was neutralized. Authority had been asserted, not through words or display, but through discipline, skill, and calm presence. And now, the ward returned to its quiet rhythm, life continuing as usual, guided by the nurse no one realized had been far more than she seemed. The night had ended. She remained, calm, steady, unremarkable to most, but in every heartbeat, every glance, and every silent acknowledgement, her authority lingered. The ward was safe. The patients were alive. And she continued her work, unseen and uncelebrated, as she always would.